The UN General Assembly and Security Council issued several resolutions and reports and urged Myanmar for restoring peace and stability in the Rakhine State for their early return. However, it seems that the Myanmar government is showing her reluctance to comply with the recommendations by the international community and violate international law, particularly with the recent coup and the instigation of the military government. The process seems to be halted unexpectedly.
The Secretary General can certainly issue public condemnatory statements, and I think the Secretary General has issued some, but could ratchet up that pressure. And that's meaningful because no government likes to be on the receiving end of a reprimand, a strong reprimand from the UN Secretary General. The Secretary General can also, of course, empower his envoy, his special envoy, who's a new envoy, Nolene Heiser, who's from Singapore, knows the region well, has been working with the UN system in the region for many years now, and understands the dynamics of the region. And that also connects to another organization that we haven't talked about, which is ASEAN, the Association for Southeast Asian Nations. Myanmar is a member of ASEAN. And ASEAN historically has taken a position of non-interference in domestic affairs, and therefore historically has been reluctant to take an overly proactive stance on situations like we see in Myanmar with respect to the Rohingya. But that has shifted slowly, and ASEAN itself is struggling. The members of ASEAN are struggling with the response to Myanmar. But I think that the international community and the Secretary General and others could work with ASEAN, perhaps put a little pressure on some of the countries in ASEAN that are not as responsive as they might be, encourage Indonesian leadership on this issue to be more proactive, to not take a non-interventionist stance, but to see that this is really a regional problem and a global problem. And then also perhaps turn to the relationship China has with the ASEAN countries and see if there isn't a way for that to be used as an effort to increase pressure on the regime. But frankly, so far it's been resistant to that kind of pressure, and so far there has not been a concerted attempt to really bring it to bear. And that brings us to your final question, which is the return of the Rohingya to Myanmar realistic? Normally, that's the first option for refugees to go back to their country of origin in a safe and dignified manner. But there are times when that's not realistic, and living in refugee camps for years and decades is not a good answer either. So the option of trying to relocate, resettle in other countries is always on the table. I think, as you know, most countries are not, in this current geopolitical climate, receptive to large inflows of new refugees or to resettling large numbers of people. So while I think that might be a solution for some, I don't think it's possible to imagine that all of those who are currently in Bangladesh will find their way to some other country. So I think really the solution has to be return to Myanmar, and much more pressure needs to be brought to bear on the regime, on the military regime in Myanmar, on the political elite, to be responsive to this strong expectation, demand of the international community, and to rely on both the great powers, but also some of the closer friends and neighbors of Myanmar to bring that pressure to bear.
I very much understand and recognize this, and as do I think the donors and international community recognize that Bangladesh is doing its best to try to help these Myanmar refugees and to try to absorb them. But as you say, Bangladesh has massive problems of its own in trying to handle its own very large population. However, there is no other way. They cannot be forced to return, to repatriate, and there are no incentives for them to repatriate. And Myanmar is not encouraging them to repatriate. So none of these possibilities are going to work. That's not going to happen. The resettlement option is not going to happen. It may be that donors or others can work bilaterally with other countries to take off small numbers of Myanmar people and resettle them. It's not ever going to be enough to make a dent in this huge population that has arrived in Cox's Bazar. And so given that, realistically, I think the only option is for Bangladesh to try to do everything it can to, and here is an example of where the Global Compact on Refugees, which was the new compact, which is very much about trying to share the burden with receiving states like Bangladesh. That's where Bangladesh can really push the donors, UN agencies to say, you have signed this compact to say that you should be sharing the burden. Here is an opportunity to share the burden and to help the people of Cox's Bazar in this broader area to absorb these refugees. So I think that's really the only way, because the other part of what I said, which is that eventually people will self-migrate away and be smuggled and will move away themselves. That will be the main way that people eventually move away from this area. But you cannot force them to move. That's illegal, and nobody wants to do that. And there are no incentives for them to go back. So they're not going to, so it's really a dilemma. But it's just to note that Bangladesh is not the only country that is facing massive and large influxes of refugees. Take the case of Uganda. It has 1 million refugees that it's hosting right now, also a small country, not facing the climate problems that Bangladesh is, or the population, but still, it's a very large number of people. So, to look at good examples, good practice that has occurred in other countries, I think would be helpful, because there are ways to absorb even such a large number of people, in ways that benefit the local people, the local population. Because there's no other option. There's no other way.